This is the Initiates Podcast. Here, we create space to explore the path of initiation as we reawaken the forgotten wisdom that resides within us all. I am your host and guide, Natalie Grace. Join me every Thursday for an enlightening exploration of contemporary spirituality. It's my honour to journey with you. Welcome, seekers, to the very first episode of the Initiates Podcast. I'm Natalie, and over the course of this episode, I'll be sharing a little bit about who I am, what I value, and the path that led me here to creating this podcast. I'll also give you an idea of the kind of content themes we'll be exploring together as this podcast and the community evolve. I'm so excited for you to join me on this journey of initiation. Beyond a certain point, the whole universe becomes a continuous process of initiation. Robert Anton Wilson. Today, many of us live a life devoid of spirit. We are immersed in the hypermaterial, our time and attention filled with external stimulation that leads us further away from spirit, from oneness, from Gaia, from the true nature of all things. In my own journey, I've come to realize that space is the key to exploring meaning. Space is the void. It's the expanse beyond the veil. It's a spectrum of experience. It's the place where we meet ourselves. As an initiate, space is something we must cultivate and explore to deepen our understanding of life and its meaning. With this podcast, I aim to create a space for modern-day initiates to share wisdom, explore ideas, and challenge our perceptions of reality. To provide guidance in navigating the path of spiritual awakening. To share stories of initiation that help to inspire and empower. To explore the history of spiritual ideas and esoteric philosophy. And to create a community of seekers who are here to walk together and support one another on their journeys. My name is Natalie Grace, and just like you, I'm an initiate of the spiritual path. I'm a semi-professional mystic. I'm a soul exploring my own evolution. I'm a student of life in the 3D realm. I'm an observer, bearing witness to the natural and unnatural world. And I believe it's my dharma to help raise the collective vibration and to empower individuals to align with their sacred mission and realize their own soul sovereignty. You and I may be acquainted through my work as an intuitive tarot reader over at Crystal Aura Tarot, where I share weekly tarot guidance and hold the sacred mission of reawakening an intuitive understanding of the language of symbols. Or you may know me via my brand of energy medicines, Flower Guide, where I supply beautiful flower remedies to support self-healing and spiritual development. Or perhaps we're meeting for the very first time. However you've come to find yourself here, listening to me today, I'm grateful for your presence and hope that you stick around to explore the path of initiation with me. I was inspired to create this podcast through my work sharing the wisdom of the tarot with the Crystal Aura Tarot community. There, I've magnetized a small but lively circle of souls who are on the spiritual path and love to receive the symbolic lessons of the tarot each week. Over time, I've found that the messages that wish to be shared are stretching beyond the confines of tarot, and I've found that using my voice to share these messages has been a source of healing and activation for me as well as those listening. And so, the Initiates Podcast was born. Hello, world. It's so good to be here with you finally. This podcast has been brewing in my vortex for a while now, and I've been imagining how it will take shape for months. And it's been a super fascinating process making it real. It feels really good, but also a little bit scary to be getting my voice and message out into the world in this way. So, to all of you who are listening, I share my sincere thanks to you for holding that space for me. As I mentioned in the intro, I believe it's my soul's mission to raise the energetic vibration of the collective and to help people claim their sovereignty, embody their truth, and align with their own sacred mission. I've been working as a spiritual guide, as a tarot reader, for about 6 months now. And even though I don't earn as much as I've earned in the past, and most of society wouldn't deem me nearly as successful as I used to be in my old career, I feel so much more myself. I feel so much more at peace. And I feel like this is just the beginning of living in alignment myself. And it's hard to understand what living in alignment means if you aren't quite there yet. But I know that even if you feel like you don't know what it is to live in alignment, you've had moments of alignment in your life that you can anchor to. And the best way to describe alignment from my perspective is feeling peace, just utter self-acceptance, beautiful spaciousness, a complete lack of pressure, just a peace at being, just feeling at complete peace in being yourself. And that's such a way out thing to think about, and it really does take devotion and practice and taking risks and letting a lot of stuff go, especially expectations of yourself and what you thought your life would look like, societal expectations that are projected onto you that you feel pressured to meet. Letting go of a lot of that stuff so that you can create more freedom in your life to feel peace. And I feel so lucky to understand what it is to feel that way in my own life. And I really do feel like it's time now to start helping others be able to activate those feelings in their lives as well. And so I'm a pretty practical person. One of the objectives of this podcast is to provide guidance, to provide practical guidance, insightful guidance, very intentional guidance on how you can also come into greater alignment. But on a more esoteric level, I really do believe, and I've been guided to believe this, that this is true, and this is true for me. And truth is something that I'll explore in a future episode. But what really feels true for me is that by delivering these messages through the vibration of my unique voice, that the vibration of my voice also has the power to activate remembering in others, remembering of their soul selves, remembering of what they're here to do, of what their sacred mission is. And so I feel like the past 6 months in working with the tarot has been a really good first step for me in connecting with people on an energetic level, in providing empowering guidance, because that's the way I like to work. It's not all fortune telling. Almost all of it for me is about empowerment, awareness and empowerment. So to provide more of that in a more accessible way, because not everyone needs a tarot reading. Tarot readings are a lot of the time sought out by people who are having trouble making decisions or feel lost or stuck. And while that's beautiful, and I love the tarot so much, this is something you're going to learn if you journey with me into future episodes. You'll learn more about my connection with the tarot and how incredibly important it's been in my own path of awakening and coming into alignment with myself. But I feel like it's a little bit too contained now, that I needed a platform to spread my wings a little bit further, to project my voice a little bit further, because I believe there's people seeking to hear the messages I have to deliver that aren't necessarily in need of the tarot right now. And so that was a really big reason to finally get in front of the microphone and start putting together this podcast. And it was a really deliberate choice to name this podcast The Initiates. I've been sitting on this name for a long time, actually. I would say even before I started reading tarot for others professionally. And the concept of initiation and what it is to be an initiate holds incredibly deep meaning. And it's really unfortunate that in the modern day, we've lost so many of our rites of initiation. There was such an important path to maturity in generations past that we don't really have anymore. And I feel like that's such a big reason why people are coming into their late 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, and feeling like they might have missed something. And it's really the portal into maturity, into wisdom, that comes from wisdom being shared, and also comes from the fearless exploration. Well, I shouldn't say fearless, because it can be incredibly scary and incredibly harrowing, but the exploration of the self. And I don't believe that you need to go to any particular mystery school to be an initiate. As the quote I recited earlier from Robert Anton Wilson expressed, I see life as the initiation, and it's a continuous process of initiation. We are provided opportunities for expansion, for evolution on a personal level, so frequently in our lives, and it's up to us when we decide to take on the challenge and level up. And that's really something that I want to support people in doing, to open up to the portal of initiation, the portals of expansion. They can come through so many different channels. They can come through wisdom drops. They can come through having an open mind and being exposed to something you'd never considered before. They can be from interactions with people who feel like angels being placed on your path to help you achieve a new layer of meaning or a new level of maturity. They can be through actual literal initiations. This can be religious, this can be esoteric. But the way I see it is very simple, that life is the initiation and the portal is the birth portal and the death portal. And our challenge really is, once we're here, is to master the self. So that's really what I'm here to explore. And through, as we know, the macrocosm is the microcosm and vice versa. And so through exploring the outer worlds, we explore the inner world. And when we explore the inner world, we learn much more about the outer world and how it operates. So this is my portal of initiation that I'm inviting you into. And I want you to know, if you're listening, you are welcome here. This community that I wish to build, I want it to be extremely supportive, open, accessible, and expansive. I have felt called to create a community and to help walk people through doorways of change, to help initiate people into new phases of their life. And I'm not here to do it for anyone. I just know that this is something that I can facilitate in others, that I can point you towards the doorway, but you must step through it yourself. And so what I'm going to be providing on this podcast is an exploration of spiritual concepts and ideas that you'll hear thrown around in lots of other channels, whether it's in groups that you're in online or other podcasts or even spiritual communities you're a part of in real life. I'm going to be exploring those in depth from a pretty intuitive perspective, and also from the perspective of higher wisdom. So something that I need to explain in this first episode is that I am a channeler. I would describe myself as an intuitive, and I'm also a channeler. So as an intuitive, I can tune into a sense of what is, what has been, and what is to come. I do that through clairaudience and claircognizance mostly. So clairaudience is hearing things in my mind, very rarely in the physical world, but sometimes in the physical world, but mostly in my mind, that these voices don't come from me. And this is something that I have experienced since I was a very young child, that I just thought was normal and that everyone experienced. And I kind of shut that off for a while, but it's always been something that's been with me. And at kind of pivotal times in my life, I've actually had some very clear, succinct messages be spoken to me through the voice of clairaudience that has kind of shaken me up to realize that this is a gift. It's a gift that lots of people have, that it's real, that it's not something scary. It's not to do with any kind of mental illness. It's really just a tuning into another bandwidth of reality. I guess I was born tuned into this station. Perhaps others are not born tuned in already, that they might have turned the dial, and in order to rehone that skill, they need to kind of learn to tune back in. And in addition to the clairaudience, I have always felt intuitive. So intuition is something we all have, but when it's kind of dialed in quite intensely, I think it's better described as claircognizance, where you have an inner innate knowing of, sometimes it's what's to come, or it might just be what hasn't been revealed. And these gifts have been really useful. Tarot's been such a great way to practice kind of opening up these skills and making them part of my everyday life, accepting them for what they are, not feeling like I have to keep them secret anymore, because now people are actually seeking those skills out from me, which is incredibly affirming and validating. And it also kind of grants me permission to explore them in a much deeper way, to develop them more deliberately or more intentionally. So there are a couple of things I think are important to share, because there's going to be a lot of intuitive guidance that's going to be shared that comes from my deepest inner knowing, but also from higher places through that channel of claircognizance. And I've further developed that channel of claircognizance through connecting in with the Akashic records. So the Akashic records, very simply, are an energetic field, I believe, where all data about my current incarnation, my past and future incarnations, it's an energetic field that holds all that data, because everything is energy, so it needs to go somewhere, right? And that's where it's captured. And you can practice, and I don't believe it's hard at all, I think anyone can do it. You can practice ways to tap into this energetic field of knowledge, of eternal universal knowledge, and grab the data you need to understand certain things. So I do that via connecting in with the Akashic records and channeling through automatic writing. So I would also describe myself as a channeler. And this again is something that you are going to be hearing me do in future episodes of the podcast, I am going to be reciting from my journal where I capture the higher wisdom that comes through from the Akashic records. And sometimes I do that for myself. Sometimes I do that, well, I always do it for clients when I'm reading the tarot. But I also just do it to learn generally about stuff in the world. Stuff like rainbows and colors and light and the pyramids and cats and anything you can think of, we can ask the Akashic records to learn more about. And that's the kind of fun, light-hearted stuff. We can go really deep with the Akashic records to learn about our soul mission, our karmic debt, our ancestral trauma, past life experiences. On a personal level, there's a lot one can learn about themselves by consulting their Akashic records. And so this is something you'll hear me talk about on this podcast fairly frequently, I guess. And I find it to be a really fun, really insightful, and really profound as well. Even just the way the message is delivered. A lot of channelers will tell you, especially those who write, that the messages that come through are incredibly poetic and beyond the kind of delivery that I could give naturally. And so I'm going to find it fun just to recite them and share them with you all, because it's such beautiful language, and the messages and the delivery hold such important transformative vibration for you to receive. So that's something you can look forward to hearing on future episodes. Another content theme that I feel very compelled to share is exploration of symbols. I love working with the language of universal symbols, visual symbols, correspondences, esoteric symbols. And through the tarot, I've really been able to hone my understanding of this language, and I feel very passionate about communicating the meaning that I receive through the symbols. And I feel like it's part of my job to demystify that language, but also in doing that, reawaken a remembering in those I work with of their own deep inner knowledge of this universal, eternal, symbolic language. And when I say eternal, I don't mean that every symbol has always existed for eternity, and that's why we understand it. I definitely think throughout history and timelines and generations, new symbology is created and projected into the mesh of our reality for us to receive. And I'm definitely going to explore that mesh in the future with you all. But I feel that we all understand these symbols. We've just been taught to forget what they mean. And my earliest recognition of these symbols was through studying art and art history in high school and university, where I was taught to decode languages of color, texture, shape, body language, and then, graphic symbology as well. And I've always kept that knowledge with me, although I don't practice as an artist, and I haven't practiced as a photographer a very long time now, which is what I was studying back then. I've retained that knowledge and I've kept it somewhere safe because I knew that it would become incredibly important for me in the future. And I do that a lot. It's that claircognizance in me. I do that a lot. I acquire things that I have no need for in the present moment that I know are going to be very important for me in the future. And the acquisition of that remembered or reawakened knowledge of the language of symbols has, in my recent life, become very important to me. It's what enabled me to connect so deeply with tarot, and it's really helped shape my worldview. I see the language of symbolic archetypes in everything that happens in our world, in the media, in the news, in entertainment, in politics. And there's so much to be gained from remembering the symbolic language. So it's really my goal here, both consciously and probably subconsciously as well, to wake up some of your forgotten or perhaps more appropriately repressed memory of the universal language of symbols. I'm going to do this in overt ways with whole episodes devoted to themes, symbolic themes. And in many aspects, like pretty much everything we talk about, there will be symbolic meaning. And I love exploring that meaning and communicating that meaning the way I see it. So that's going to be a big part of what I am excited to do on this podcast with you all. Another thing that I'm really excited to share is conversations, stories of initiation and spiritual awakening from light workers, other guides, wisdom keepers, way showers, alchemists, energy workers, intuitives, initiates, other initiates on the spiritual path. And I've got such an exciting list of people coming up, and also those who I'm going to be hitting up to come chat on the podcast. These aren't going to be super frequent. They're going to be placed on the timeline when they are ready to be heard. So you can probably expect an interview once every 4 episodes, maybe 3, depending on the content. And I'm really excited to explore the journey of spiritual awakening and spiritual remembering with other people who I connect with. Some are very deep, profound connections at a friend level. Others more like spiritual colleagues in realms that kind of intersect or maybe even just touch up next to each other. I've got a really exciting interview coming up with a dear friend of mine, and we're going to be talking about creativity, imagination, space, and also polarity. A really interesting conversation. So that'll be up soon. So stay tuned for that one. In the intro, I very deliberately talked about this being a space to challenge our beliefs. And I feel like that's something that's not done as frequently as it should be done in the spiritual community. I feel like that's lacking from a lot of our guides and teachers at the moment. People just going along with things without really questioning where these ideas come from. The other thing I'm seeing is a lot of people claiming ownership over spiritual ideas and philosophies that have been around for decades, centuries, sometimes even thousands of years. But I'm really interested in getting to the source of where these concepts come from so that we can really understand them and also decide whether we align with them as our truth or we're happy just to allow others to play in those spaces. I don't hold any judgment about any of these ideas. I'm just got a really curious mind, and it's something that I would love to expand on more deeply in research and reading and an investigation, actually. So that's something that I want to do with this podcast. I want to be conducting a historical exploration of spiritual concepts and New Age philosophies, placing the current day spiritual ideas and beliefs in a more historical and cultural context. And my emphasis is really going to be on Western spirituality and New Age movements. And this is because it's aligned with my interest and also my heritage. And I also think that the recent history of the past century has been incredibly spiritually rich, and there have been some really well-known, profound, culture-shaping esoteric movements that we've kind of forgotten about. You know, we refer to, say, the theosophers of the late 19th, early 20th centuries as being very influential. but we don't really go deep into their ideas and how much they've shaped spiritual thinking of the current day. And I'm really interested to remind us all of that recent history. So, this is something that I'm super excited to do with this podcast, and I hope you find as interesting as me. This content will become more prevalent as the podcast evolves, but I really wanted to mention this theme from the very onset because I want to commit to delivering it in the future because it's going to take such a big amount of research and exploration, but I think it would be totally worth it. And I think you'll all get so much out of it too. More importantly, I think that many of us are ready to have our beliefs challenged. And I think this is a really good way to do that, to go back to the source, the recent source, and then where their source came from. Another reason that I think it would be really cool to explore this as a theme, an ongoing theme through this podcast, the history of these spiritual ideas and concepts, is because of the prevalence of female leadership. And again, I feel like that's something we've forgotten, but I feel like time moves in cycles, and in the spiritual communities that I am a part of and the spheres, the content spheres that I engage with, there is again an emergence of female leadership happening right now. And we sometimes think this is really new. Like, we've never had this much freedom, this much authority before. But I would like to remind us all of the power of the female wisdom keeper. Going, back through New Age movement of the 80s with Barbara Hank-Lau. You've got amazing channelers from the 60s and 70s like Jane Roberts channeling Seth. And you can go back to the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s with those later theosophers like Alice Bailey, for instance, and of course, Madame Blavatsky. I would like to really re-examine the roles of authority and leadership that women held in those times in history, because I think it'd be really, really interesting as an exploration. I know there'll be a lot of women listening to this podcast, so I think you'll find it really interesting and enlightening. But also because I feel like we now have a lot in common with that time in history, and there's potentially a lot we can learn from those female leaders of the past. And so I'm excited to explore this prevalence of female leadership from our recent history because it parallels with what we're seeing today, new spiritual movements led by women and the adoption of divine feminine leadership as a means to herald in the new age. I also think it's time for a remembering of the existence of female leadership in our recent history that I feel we've forgotten or repressed. Repressed is probably more appropriate, in favor of aligning with archetypes of victimhood like the witch's wounds. I think it's time we let those go and align with the stories of power within the history of spiritual movements. That's not the only role that is true for women. Women have held incredible positions of spiritual authority and cultural power, cultural authority, cultural influence. So I'm excited to explore the archetype of the female leader beyond the persecuted witch, because I feel like it's an incredibly disempowering archetype, and we've been branded with this for so long as a means to help us forget our own power. And I'm all about empowerment. So this is something that I think is really important for us to go back and remember, re-examine and remember. I also think it's important on this first episode, as you're getting to know me, to discuss some of my most important values. I think it's a really useful way to feel whether you're in alignment with me and my message. So if we're going to talk about what I'm about, what I believe in, soul sovereignty is probably at the top of the list. Soul sovereignty is what it is to live in your authenticity, and more importantly, or just as importantly, what it is to detach from systems of control, some call it the matrix, in favor of being the ultimate authority in your own life. And I feel like I've done a pretty good job of this to date. On my own journey, it's been a long process of interacting, of feeling oppressed by the system, and then in feeling victimized and aligning with that vibration of the victim of this oppressive society that doesn't want me to feel free. And it's been a slow but really interesting process to discover what it is to free oneself and to feel what it is to be free. And I think, again, just like initiation, this is a lifelong process to claim and then stand in your own sovereignty. But it's something that I want to share with you guys and do all that I can to empower and activate in you all too. If you're in a space in your life where you feel like you don't have control, you don't have authority over how you wish to live, I can help you. It feels weird to say, but I really do feel like I can help you. I'm going to share my journey. I'm going to share that practical guidance I spoke of earlier. I'm going to share conversations with others who have freed themselves from feeling oppressed, from feeling victimized, who felt out of control, and share their stories of how they've claimed their own sovereignty. So that's something super important to me, and it's going to be really the undercurrent of this whole entire journey. I really value space and spaciousness. It's something that you're going to hear me talk about quite a lot. I feel like it's the pathway to sovereignty and the pathway to peace, and that when you can access peace via spaciousness, the doorways to your own evolution begin to appear. There's no more distractions. All there is space for you to see what is, and to start engaging with those portals of activation, those portals of change and initiation. And spaciousness and exploring space, for me, is something we do on all levels. It's thoughts, it's emotions, it's beliefs, it's expectations, it's physical space, it's space clearing, it's how we live in our day-to-day lives. Spaciousness in the body, there's so much to it, but it's actually one of the most practical things that you can do to help yourself feel more sovereign. Space is where so many answers reside, and space is also where you develop your psychic skills and extrasensory abilities. So if that's something that you're interested in and you're drawn to me because you see me work with those, I want to help you kind of explore that part of yourself too. And cultivating space and exploring spaciousness is a really good way to do that. I believe in the multidimensionality of life. This probably has a lot to do with the way I read symbols, but I really do believe that we live in what some might describe as a fractal universe, that everything has multiple layers of meaning. And it's part of my mission to explore and consider the different dimensions of existence, whether this is different planes of reality or different worlds, different purposes or meanings for things that people would just take for granted, or people themselves, that we're all fractals of a unity reality, and that exploration and consideration of each of us as a different dimension of existence is a really useful pursuit as an initiate, as one on the path of initiation. And one of the easiest ways, I think, to explore this multidimensionality of life, which is another one of my kind of core values, is to keep a radically open mind. And so it's my mindset that anything is possible. And for that reason, I keep my mind open to all possibilities. And I accept that truth is defined within. And I value truth above facts. And that my truth is just mine. Other people's truths are theirs. I respect other people's right to their own truths, even when, or especially when, they oppose my own truths. And this kind of radically open mindset comes, I think, from my evolving understanding of the nature of duality and my natural yearning to explore the spectrum of space held within the poles that contain our duality. Tarot's helped me a lot with this. If you ever see pillars in tarot, there's usually a cloth or some kind of veil that sits between the two pillars or some kind of action happening. And that's where I like to play, in the space between the two poles. And I will talk a lot about this, especially when it comes to us understanding the nature of the matrix, understanding messages of mass media and politics. Those controlling powers don't want us to play in this space between. They don't want us to have open minds. And I think this is something that actually we need to practice intentionally, because it's really helpful in cultivating that space I spoke of, but also living in your own authenticity instead of just adhering to other people's expectations of what we believe. And the reality of this mindset, this radically open mindset, is that you have to accept that your views will evolve. And having an acceptance of this is really, it's being open to your own evolution and also being open about your evolution. So to have an open mind, from my perspective, is to be vulnerable. And that's because you might find in time that you're wrong about something. Are you okay with being wrong? That's something that I wasn't okay with for a really long time, and now I'm fine with it. I actually don't care at all if I'm wrong. I don't care if someone sees me be wrong. It's part of my evolution. And if I'm right about everything, why am I even here anymore? I can just leave this plane and go somewhere else where I can learn something new. And so I think having or keeping this radically open mind is a really great awareness practice. Cultivating that open-mindedness and the fact that you could be wrong and you're okay with that, it's really like the deepest meaning of humility, that vulnerability and that self-acceptance. It's a fantastic way of cultivating self-awareness. So bearing witness, I believe, is another one of those pathways to experiencing moments of peace. It's living life with the intention, as much as you can possibly fathom, of witnessing, rather than feeling compelled to participate based on what's happening around you or outside of yourself. This is a pretty new value that I've come to in more recent times, because I used to be so engaged in politics and media narratives. I would say it was one of my biggest hobbies, which I just feel like is a really weird thing to say right now. What a weird hobby to have. At the point when I came to the realization that no matter how much I wanted to interact with the narratives of, say, politics or societal issues, no matter how much of my brain power or my energy, my vitality, my passion I gave to those interactions, it didn't really change much at all. And I found it much more powerful to evolve to a position of bearing witness. So rather than feeling caught up in all those prescribed narratives, those often polarized narratives I spoke of earlier that want you to pick one side or the other and you're right and the other person on the other side is wrong, rather than feeling caught up in all of that, and we're talking like whether these are big world events or just events in my own microcosm, even if we're talking just about friendship circle politics or workplace politics, I evolve to the point where I feel free to participate when I choose, in a way that feels authentic to me and honors my own truth, instead of feeling compelled, like I must I must participate. It's a process of removing the pressure to respond in a certain way. I've gotten to the point now where I really do believe it's simply enough to bear witness, to sit in that middle space and observe all that's happening, honor the polarized viewpoints, and then in the center decide where you fit, if it's something you want to interact with, and if you do, what's your authentic position. And so if you feel the urge to participate and it is in alignment with your truth, by all means you should honor that. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, and I do when I feel in that way, when something's in alignment. But I really do believe the first intention should always be to bear witness, as it's the neutral perspective. It's taking the neutral perspective of that middle path. And from that place, you can act in alignment with your own truth whenever you feel called in a much more powerful way. It's not my intention to talk politics on this podcast at all, but going back to that need to challenge our own beliefs, I think that's really where I'm coming at from this, that in my own life, bearing witness is so important and it's been so freeing to me. And I would like to grant you all permission to do the same whenever you feel it's appropriate for you, instead of feeling pressured that someone's going to cast some value judgment on you based on your so-called inaction. That it's not inaction to bear witness. It's actually what we're all here to do. And I feel like we've kind of forgotten that. And so I guess that all leads to us living in alignment. And what does that mean? Well, I feel like living in alignment is the road to finding space and peace in your life. Often I'd probably describe it as aligning with your highest timeline, and that can sound a lot like manifestation or, trying to timeline jump or something like that. But you living out your life as your best self, you hearing the call of your highest destiny. And when I say highest, I mean the very best, your most full potential, you realizing your full potential. That process is very challenging. And I feel like it's booby-trapped with your own fears, that once you get to being in alignment, and again, I don't think anyone sits in alignment, maybe Jesus, forever without having to try. And even he was challenged, right? But I think it's those moments of feeling in alignment where you do feel at peace with decisions you've made, that you do feel fulfilled in the work that you're doing, that you feel a beautiful fiery spark of passion in you. And you know it comes from the place of being in alignment with you, what your deepest self truly desires for you, what your highest path of destiny is. So when you come into alignment with that path, you start to realize it's the path of least resistance, and you start to let the lower aspects of self, like resistance and sabotage, fall away. So when I talked about those booby traps, that's kind of what I meant. On the road to alignment, you are confronted with so many of your own fears, and I feel like they're the booby traps. It's your ego. Again, something that I'm sure I'll talk about on future podcasts: alignment, the ego, self-sabotage. But just for now, the best way to describe it is it's the opposite. Alignment's the opposite of chaos and discord. It's space and peace. And the only way to find these feelings is really to face our fears. So this is something that crippled me for a really long time. Fear of other people's judgment, fear of people not liking me, fear of missing out, which lots of people feel commonly, missing out on something by some certain age, or missing out on some experience that other people are having that you think you should be having too. Fear of being alone with oneself, fear of doing things that are hard, fear of finding confidence and backing yourself. There's so many fears. And I want to explore those with you through this podcast so that we can all feel a little bit more supported in coming into closer alignment with our higher selves. And just to go right back to basics, everything is energy. And while we're here, why don't we raise that energetic vibration? And that's really what I'm about. It's what I've received from my guides and from way showers and wisdom keepers that I've worked with as well, who've helped to activate this within me, that I can contribute very positively to the world, the collective, by helping to raise the vibration in myself, in those I work with, and the broader collective, the world as a whole. And that's what I want to do. That's why I'm here. But for now, I think that's a good summary of what I care about, what I value, what you can expect from this podcast as it evolves, and also get a feel of the vibe that I carry and project. And through that, you can get a sense of the type of community that I'm aiming to build here. So if this is something that you would like to be a part of, subscribe to the podcast so you can be notified whenever there's a new episode that drops. I will be releasing new episodes on Thursdays each week, and I've very deliberately chosen Thursday because, as you know now, I love correspondences, and the planetary correspondence for Thursday is Jupiter, and Jupiter as a planet represents expansion, higher learning, and that's really what this podcast is about. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. If you'd like to work with me, I offer remote one-on-one soul map and soul message readings. Just check the show notes or head over to my website at theinitiatespodcast.com to learn more. You can also find links there to all the ways you can support the show. Thanks again for your time, and I'll see you next week.